There are two men who will never speak to each other. Not because they don't know each other. They do, intimately. Not because they live on different continents. They live in the same city. Sometimes they pass each other on the street. But for 40 years, they have not exchanged a single word. They were soldiers once, on opposite sides of a war most people have forgotten. A war that ended decades ago, on paper. But wars don't end when the shooting stops. They end when the men who fought them can finally let go. And some men never do. This is the story of a conflict that no one remembers. And two men who can't forget. The Cold War produced dozens of proxy conflicts. Small wars, brutal wars. Wars fought in places most people couldn't find on a map. Wars where superpowers armed young men and sent them to kill each other over ideologies they barely understood. Eritrea and Ethiopia, 1974 to 1991. A border dispute that became a bloodbath. Backed by the Soviets on one side, the Americans on the other. Hundreds of thousands dead. Entire villages erased. When it ended, the world moved on. The soldiers did not. Because here's what history books don't tell you. Peace treaties are signed by politicians in air-conditioned rooms. But the men who pulled the triggers, who watched their friends die, who learned to hate with a precision that takes years to sharpen, they don't get treaties. They get silence and memory, and the impossible task of returning to normal life. This is a story about two of those men. We'll call them Dawit and Tesfaye. Not their real names, but their story is real. And it asks a question that haunts every war. What do you do with the enemy when the fighting is over? Dawit was 19 when he was conscripted. A student, quiet. He had plans to become a teacher. Then the war came, and plans stopped mattering. He was handed a rifle and sent to the front. No training, no time, just orders. Within weeks, he had killed his first man. He doesn't talk about how it felt, but he remembers the face. He remembers them all. Tesfaye was 22, a farmer's son, strong, good with his hands. He joined because his older brother had been killed in a raid. Because rage is the fastest recruitment tool there is. He believed in the cause. At first. But belief is a fragile thing in war. It dissolves the first time you see a child's body in the rubble. The first time you realize the man you just shot was carrying a photograph of his family. By the end, Tesfaye didn't believe in anything. He just survived. They never met during the war. But they were part of the same brutal arithmetic. Two sides of the same equation. Each doing what soldiers do. Following orders, staying alive, trying not to think too hard about what it all meant. The war ended in 1991. Eritrea won its independence. Ethiopia withdrew. Celebrations erupted in the streets. Flags waved. Speeches were made about peace and reconciliation and a new beginning. But for Dawit and Tesfaye, nothing changed. Dawit returned to his village, or what was left of it. His family was gone, his home destroyed. The life he'd planned, teaching, marriage, children, felt like a story someone else had told him once. He couldn't sleep, couldn't hold a conversation, couldn't stop seeing the faces. He moved to the city, found work as a laborer, kept his head down, spoke to no one. He learned to live in a kind of internal exile, present, but not really there, functional, but hollow. Tesfaye had a similar trajectory. He went back to his family's farm, tried to work the land, but his hands, which had once planted seeds, now only knew how to hold a weapon. He drank, he fought, he pushed away everyone who tried to help. Eventually, he too moved to the city. a place where no one knew him, where he could disappear into the noise. And then, one day, they saw each other. It was 1995, 4 years after the war. A busy street corner. Tesfaye was getting off a bus. Dawit was walking past. Their eyes met. And in that instant, they both knew. Not because they recognized each other's faces. They had never met. But soldiers develop an instinct, a way of reading posture, scars, the particular weight someone carries in their shoulders. They knew. For a moment, neither moved. Then Tesfaye's jaw tightened. His hands clenched. 40 years of rage condensed into a single look. Dawit turned and walked away. And that was it. No confrontation, no conversation, just a silent acknowledgement of something neither could name. Over the years, they saw each other again, and again. The city wasn't that big. Their routines overlapped. The same bus stop, the same market, the same quiet corner cafe where old men sat in silence. Each time, the same thing happened. Eye contact, recognition, tension, and then nothing. They never spoke, never approached, never even nodded. But the silence between them was louder than any words. Because what do you say to the man who represents everything you lost? Everything you did? Everything you can't forgive, in yourself or in him. People noticed. Friends asked Dawit why he avoided that man at the cafe. Tesfaye's co-workers wondered why he always left when the other guys showed up. But neither would explain. How do you tell someone that the war isn't over? That every time you see that face, you're back in the trenches? That peace is just a word politicians use. And for you, the fighting never stopped? Years passed, then decades. They grew old in the same city, watched it change, watched a new generation grow up, kids who had no idea what the war had been about, who didn't understand why the old men sometimes stared at nothing and clenched their fists. Dawit never married, never had children. He lived alone, working small jobs, keeping to himself. Tesfaye did marry, but it didn't last. His wife said he was never really present, that he carried something inside him that wouldn't let anyone in. And through it all, through 40 years of ordinary life, bills and birthdays and the slow march of time, the two men continued their silent standoff, still living in the same city, still seeing each other, still refusing to speak. In 2019, a journalist heard about them. She was writing a piece about post-war reconciliation, about what happens to soldiers after the cameras leave, about the invisible wounds that never make it into history books. She tracked them down, interviewed them separately, and she asked the question everyone had been too polite to ask. Why? Why, after 40 years, can't you just talk to each other? Dawit's answer was simple. Because if I talk to him, I have to forgive him. And if I forgive him, I have to forgive myself. And I don't know how to do that. Tesfaye said something similar. I look at him and I see everything I wish I could forget. Every choice I made, every person I hurt. He's a mirror, and I don't want to look. The journalist asked if they'd ever consider meeting, sitting down, just once. Both men said no, not out of hatred, not anymore. Hatred requires energy, and they were too tired. But because some wars are fought inside, and those wars don't have endings, they have truces, temporary ceasefires, long stretches of quiet punctuated by sudden flashbacks. And sometimes, the only way to survive is to avoid the battlefield entirely. Even if the battlefield is just a man's face on a city street. Dawit died in 2021. Heart failure, quiet, alone. Tesfaye heard about it a week later, through a mutual acquaintance. someone who thought he should know. He didn't go to the funeral, but he did something he hadn't done in decades. He went to the place where they used to see each other, the cafe, the corner where their paths had crossed so many times. He sat down, ordered tea, and for the first time in 40 years, he didn't look over his shoulder. The war that made them soldiers ended in 1991, but the war that made them enemies, that war never ended. Because wars aren't events, they're conditions, states of being, things that lodge in the nervous system and rewrite the architecture of a life. You can sign treaties, you can redraw borders, you can declare peace and move on, but you can't legislate forgiveness. You can't mandate healing. You can't force two men to let go of the thing that defined them for so long that they don't know who they'd be without it. Tesfaye still lives in that city. He's an old man now, thin, quiet. He goes to the cafe sometimes, sits in the same spot, and if you asked him whether the war is over, he'd probably say yes, because that's what you're supposed to say. But if you watched him long enough, the way his hands tremble when a door slams, the way his eyes go distant when sirens pass, you'd understand. The war isn't over. It just learned to be quiet.